this is Chadillac, and we're here today to talk about jazz. It's Sunday morning. I'm kind of a little bored, and I love jazz. As you can see from the background, Thelonious Monk is my favorite, and I've kind of taken it upon myself to learn more about jazz over the last couple of years. So I started. Actually, let me tell you the story about how I became interested in jazz. I was walking around at a Grateful Dead show, and I didn't get a ticket that day. We were at Deer Creek, Indiana. It would have been 91 probably. And I'd been to the 2 nights before, and the show had started, but it was still daylight out. It was a summer tour. It was really beautiful. And I was doing a couple of nitrous balloons. And I was walking around, and I ran into this guy who was playing something I'd never heard before. And it wound up being, because I was on nitrous, it sounded like something otherworldly. Well, it actually wound up being Frank Zappa, and it was the record Joe's Garage. And so that was my very first exposure to Frank Zappa. I'd never heard anything from Zappa before, or at least not to my knowledge at that point. So Zappa is his own thing. He's certainly not jazz, but he's not necessarily that far removed from jazz. He's kind of something all his own, and that's why Zappa is so important in the music world. And maybe one of these days I'll do a show on him, because he was something utterly fantastic. If you get a chance to check out his son Dweezil doing Zappa Plays Zappa, go see it, because it's spot on. He plays whatever album he's doing that time from Frank. He just plays it start to finish. He has most of Frank's old players, and he goes through and plays it. I digress. So I'm walking by, and I stop, and there's this guy sitting there, and he's got a kind of a cap on. I didn't know much about culture at that point. Keep in mind this is 90. This would have been 90, because I would have been 19 years old. So yeah, this was 1990. The Dead had just started playing Deer Creek. So this is their first tour back, I believe, unless they played 89. But I would have been in high school in 89 and didn't know anything about the Dead. So 90 was my very first tour, my very first Dead tour. And didn't know what I even thought about the music, but I knew I loved the culture. I knew I loved the scene, and so everything else kind of came along with it after that. And then the music sort of enveloped me as I went. I was kind of the one honest guy that said, I don't know if I like the music, but I love what's happening around this, so I'm going to stick around no matter what. Where a lot of people sort of fake their way about how much they love the Grateful Dead music and that kind of stuff, and you kind of tell they really didn't like it, because when you looked in their record collection, they had Metallica and Wasp or Kiss or whatever, and they were there doing their Grateful Dead dance, and it was pretty fake. And I just never worried about faking a Grateful Dead dance. I just was kind of there to hang out and have fun, and do nitrous and drop some acid and whatever, and feel the love. And I developed as a human being because of that, and I'm grateful for that. So I digress. So there's this guy, and he's in this hat that I'd never seen before. What it wound up being was I think I call it a maca, maybe. I'm not sure, but it's a round hat that sits on the head. Certain African cultures and tribes wear it. But he had the full long robe / dress. The African garb, if you will, and he was brushing his teeth with a stick, and he said, "Would you like to try, brother?" And I said, "I want to know what you're listening to, man." And he goes, "Ah, you like Zappa?" And I said, "Is that what that is?" And he showed me the picture of the CD that he was playing in his car, and that's how I fell in love with Frank Zappa. I immediately went out a couple of days or maybe a week or whatever later and bought Joe's Garage by Frank Zappa, and that was my first turn on to Frank Zappa. And frankly, it took me a long time to like anything else besides Joe's Garage from Frank Zappa, because that was such a departure from other things that Frank did in his earlier days. Joe's Garage was way later in Frank's career. And so it actually had come out sort of that 90, 91, 92 area, whatever that was. So, you know, would have been 90 or 91, whatever that was. Anyway, nitrous does strange things to the brain, and it does wonderful and beautiful things to a lot of different kinds of music. And because of that, I discovered jazz in this really strange way. So all of that leads to this. I'm doing nitrous, sitting there with this African-American gentleman who was from Kenya, I believe, but he was an American citizen, so he was technically an African-American. And I got really tight with the guy, and I couldn't even tell you his name because I don't think we ever exchanged names. We sort of didn't need to. It was that kind of a deal. And we were really cool with each other, and we hung out. I think we did like 3 or 4 shows together after that before we just sort of departed ways and went on our own. But you know, roads wind. I hope one day I wind up seeing that brother again if he's still living. If you're out there, brother, peace be upon you, man. I learned to scrub my teeth with a stick at that point. That's how you brush your teeth in Africa, apparently. And his teeth were pearly white as could be. And he turned me on to Frank Zappa. So through Zappa, I developed an understanding of, first of all, Zappa plays a lot of what I call glockenspiel. Now, I know that there are different names for it, but harmonically it sounds the same to me as what I played as a child, which was a glockenspiel. And I remember I had my big part in the school play in first grade, and I got to play the glockenspiel, and I mean, I took it really seriously. I had that solo. I can still play it to this day. 47. I've had 2 major brain injuries. Well, not major in comparison to my son, but I've had 2 pretty heavy brain injuries. One of which gave me, God, it's hard to do, these scars. So anyways, where was I at? Okay, yeah. So I got into doing nitrous really heavily, and I was doing it too heavily, actually. And you know, those who say that nitrous isn't addictive or whatever, I've suffered from addiction my entire life, and if it can be a mood, mind-altering chemical, if it can change your mood, if it can make you feel a different way than you feel right now, I can become addicted to it, and that's just how it is. I have if you want to call it a disease, that's fine. The disease model works for me. If you want to call it a syndrome, that's fine. If you want to call it a mental illness, that's still a disease, and that's fine. If you want to call it a weakness, I don't buy that. But if you want to call it that, that's fine. I really don't give a shit. Whatever it is, I have it, and I've had to deal with it my entire life. And if it's a weakness, man, there's an awful lot of weak people out there, because I see everybody suffer from it in one way or another every day. Addiction is nothing to be played with or to be taken lightly. So anyways, I became addicted to, believe it or not the huge tanks that we used to get from, well, the statute of limitations has passed, but for the sake of keeping things, anyway, let's just say that we used to get tanks of nitrous oxide and take them to shows on Grateful Dead tours, and we would sell 1 tank, and then after that we would give them away because we would make enough on 1 tank to pay for our entire tour. And so it was wonderful. We were able to do things. Everybody else, they sold tank after tank after tank and made huge money. And they were just drug dealers, just nothing more than that. And we loathed the idea that people were on tour doing that when they were supposed to be out there spreading brotherly love, and you know, it was supposed to be about the music and about love. You know, you see that more kind of like fish shows or whatever, where people are out dealing drugs, and I'm not into that whole scene at all. Anyway, so I got involved in buying the little whippet canisters, and I would put them into this whipped cream canister that you see on like the cooking shows, and use that to inhale the nitrous oxide. And the difference between inhaling it out of a balloon and inhaling it through that canister is that the canister actually forces it into your lungs. So when it forces it into your lungs, it also forces your lungs to fill, and it forces your lungs to then force it through the bronchi, and that actually forces it into the bloodstream more quickly, and so you get a way higher high off of the canisters than you do off of the balloons. I don't recommend any of this. It is extremely addictive. Nitrous oxide will kill you, because what happens with nitrous is that people can fall asleep and not realize that they have left the canister open, if they have the tanks, and they die from suffocation because they die from lack of oxygen. And I have actually seen that come this close to happening. We used to do it until our lips, our eyelids, the areas of our nose right here, our lips all the way around, our eyelids and our fingernails were totally purple, because we did not have any oxygen. We had nitrous oxide in our bodies instead. So how does that lead to solo monk? How do I do that? That's dumb. the background. So how does that lead to me and Thelonious Monk? Well, I had made a mixtape, and in that mixtape, somehow I had accidentally come across a jazz song had gotten into a mixtape that I had made. And I used to, and I do not recommend this. I was 19, 20, 21 years old. I'm now 47. Please, please do not do this kind of stuff. I was young. I was very stupid. I was very irresponsible, and I'm so fortunate that I didn't hurt somebody. I'm so, so fortunate that I didn't hurt somebody. Having said that, so buyer beware. Do not do this. Do not do this. Do not do this. But I would drive down the road. I had this killer stereo system in this old beat up truck I had. But you know, in a truck, especially a small cabin truck, you can put an incredible system in there with a couple of Rockford Fosgate speakers and a Punch 45 amp, which is what I had, and just a tape deck, a cheap tape deck. And I would make a mixtape that I thought would sound really great, and I would mix it and bend it all together. And you know, this is before there were even CDs, guys. So you know, you could get CDs, but you couldn't mix them back then, and you couldn't use them in your car because they would skip and stuff like that. So this is then. This is the early 90s. Like I said, I was 20, 21 years old. So I would be driving down the road doing nitrous oxide out of my whippet canister, and you know, everything is turning into a different world as it's blowing by me, and there are felt hats rolling in the field, and you know, bicycles, you know, spinning around, and tornadoes, and every kind of imaginable thing you can possibly think of, and it's all going with the music, and the windows are bending and flaring when I'm listening to Pantera's and then all of a sudden, from I was actually listening to, at that point, so this would date this, I was listening to Pantera, Vulgar Display of Power, Regular People. And it was going bum 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 bum. Most regular people would say, bum 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 bum, it's hard. Any streetwise son of a bitch knows. Don't fuck with this. And it went from that, and at the end of it, he goes, and it goes from that, and then right into and jazz. And I actually had Miles Davis. I think I had Run the Voodoo down on, and I went from simple 3-chord 4-chord. And look, Pantera is an amazing band. I still love them. They're one of the most talented metal bands of that time in what they did, because they were able to deliver a hook and a huge undertone and create massive walls of sound without distorting everything by putting too many different things together. They kept it very, very simple, but at the same time they were concise about what they did, and they did something really magnificent and different at the same time. So they were magnificent. What I'm saying is they were an extremely talented band, regardless of what anybody wants to say. And, you know, oh, compare them to, you know, I don't know, I don't know any of the death metal bands now, but yeah, they're really, really great, and they have incredible instrumentation, and I understand all of that. But Pantera, they were a band who made that big leap forward so that guys like Cannibal Corpse could come in and do what they're doing, and do what the other bands who leached off Cannibal Corpse are doing today. So, you know, Phil used to wear a Cannibal Corpse shirt on stage, so there you go. And I read the lyrics to Hammer Smashed Face, and I never want to hear anything from Cannibal Corpse again. Anyone who could write that, something is very, very wrong with them, and I hope they get help. So, anyways, okay, so what does that have to do with jazz, right? Okay, so I digress again. So I think it was Miles Runs the Voodoo Down, from Bitches Brew, side 2, I believe. It's a four-sided album, so it would be side 3 on the album, and it was either Miles Runs the Voodoo Down or it was the Pharaoh's Dance. I don't remember which, but either way, it's incredible. And my brain went from this sort of predictable, here it is, here's your hook, here's your note, here's your hook, here's your other note. I understand this, I expect it, I know exactly what's coming next. Boom, to I have no idea what this is, and I'm still under the influence of nitrous, but I woke up. My buzz, as it were, my cloud, my dreamlike state, because nitrous is a hypnotic, was completely gone. And I went, whoa, what is this? And I don't know how I got it on there. I just accidentally put it on somehow when I was dicking around. I had a huge disc player, and I had bought Bitches Brew because I thought, you know, I should try and expand my musical horizons, and I'll try this one, I guess. It's got a cool cover. And you know, a lot of times, I think something that kids miss today is that we used to go to record stores and spend hours and hours just flipping through the records and looking, you know, pulling up the covers and looking at them and flipping them over. And, you know, if they'd been open, you could open them and look at the sleeves. And man, that's a huge loss. That if you're lucky enough to have a really big record store like here in Indiana, where I'm at in North Central Indiana, we have a place called American Hi-Fi Dream in Kokomo, Indiana. Some really cool guys. Mike Wilson, downtown Kokomo, great guys. He probably wouldn't even want me to say he knows me. I don't know if our politics mix or whatever, but whatever. I love the store. I think it's cool. And he's priced really well, and you can go through his records and look at them and pull the covers out and check the record and make sure it's good, because he sells used records and new records. J&L Records in Lafayette, Indiana, much more expensive, but they have a massive, massive selection of new and used records, albums, vinyl. And so if you want to go there, you can do that. And Vaughn's Records still carries a small amount of vinyl, nothing like they used to, but they used to be the ones to go to. And there used to be a record store in every single mall you went to, and all that's gone now, so it sucks. But anyways, none of them ever really carried jazz except the cool ones like J&L Records, and and Vaughn's Records. So I would go there. So once I found that, I was like, I have to know more about this, not because I like it, but because I don't, because I didn't like it, and I couldn't understand why it was that I didn't like it. And I thought, I know there's something about this that I kind of think I should like, but I don't know why. And I felt something akin to the Frank Zappa thing there, where this isn't rock and roll, this isn't metal, it's not pop music at all, it's not classical. What is this? It's not the blues. It's not the blues, because the blues is just, the rock and roll is just the blues just sped up. It's just faster blues, basically. When you hear the blues and they're like bang 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 bang, my dog ran away. Speed that up 3 times and you've got my dog ran away today. My wife left me too. Same old thing, When I watch movies, I loathe when I know what's going to happen at the end of the movie after the first 30 seconds of the entrance of the movie. And I never felt that way about music until after that day, driving down the road doing nitrous oxide out of a whipped cream canister. And I went from Pantera's Regular People to Miles Davis running the voodoo down. And all of a sudden I couldn't figure out what it was, and I had to know. So it took me a really long time to even understand jazz enough to just to get a grip on it and say, okay, this is what it even is. After that, I started to listen to it to understand it. So I started to go out and kind of pick up some jazz. But you have to understand something. I was in my 20s. I was always broke. I was on drugs all the time. I was drunk all the time. Your 20s, man. You're talking about, we went through the 80s. We were farmers in the 80s. We were a bunch of farm kids who had nothing to do except smoke dope, eat acid, grow dope, smoke all the dope we grew, eat more acid, eat mushrooms, smoke more dope, take every single pill we could get our hands on. And because my parents were involved with a family that was all medical, I had access to all the pills and all the drugs and all the samples that came home. And again, this is the 80s and even the late 70s and early 80s. So things were very, very different back then. And the drugs were much more potent in many ways than they are now. Even though they say, oh, well, Oxycontin this and that, eat a Quaalude once and then tell me about Oxycontin, but, and then that's not to say that I was even, I missed the Quaalude generation, but I can tell you this, I know what liquid codeine is, and I used to drink a 4-ounce bottle of it before, during, and after school, and by the time I was 15, it had nearly driven me mad, and I was institutionalized and spent 2 weeks in a rubber room strapped down by my hands and ankles. In other words, stay away from that shit. It's terrible for you. I know a lot about addiction. Maybe one of these days we'll talk about it, but we're talking about jazz today. But somehow it all kind of bends together, doesn't it? So, what's that got to do with Solo Monk? So I started listening to jazz to try and figure out what it all meant. And of course, when you hear jazz, you hear, 2 major names come up. Miles Davis, right? Everybody wants to talk about Miles Davis and John Coltrane. And if you've got somebody who's really really deeply into it, they'll talk about Dizzy Gillespie. And I knew Dizzy Gillespie because, I remembered the Cheeks and kind of stuff like that from the Rock Around the Clock show, I think it was. Something like that. There was a show that kind of came on that was sort of a rock show for adults, that we kids would kind of sit around and watch when we were, I don't know, this is the early to mid 70s when we watched this, so a long, long time ago when there were only 3 channels on the tube and you had to get up and turn the channel. So those of you old enough to know that, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, you're probably not listening to this anyway. You tuned out a long time ago. That's cool, whatever. I'm just doing this because I don't have anything to do today. So nobody's going to watch this anyway, so who cares? So my point is this. I was trying to figure out what jazz was, and I started to do it through understanding what Frank Zappa was. And so I took the things Frank Zappa did, and I took the things that Miles Davis did on Bitches Brew, which were kind of the only 2 records I had that weren't, you know, and you know, or Kiss, or you know, something like that weren't rock or metal. And I began to understand that there was a different thing out there, and that ultimately led me into understanding what the Grateful Dead was about, how bluegrass worked, and how the Grateful Dead coincided almost perfectly with jazz. How Frank Zappa was a different incarnation of the Dead, or the Dead and Zappa were sort of the same kind of thing. They were their very own brand of music. They weren't rock. They weren't, you know, everybody says that the Grateful Dead are psychedelic rock or that they're a jam band. No, they weren't. They were the Grateful Dead. And they're not anymore. The Grateful Dead stopped when Jerry died, and the Grateful Dead probably stopped. In my opinion, they stopped before they made Touch of Grey. But, you know, we can argue that, whatever. We'll talk about that on the show about the Dead one day if you want to. But, boy, for this being the Jazz Kitchen, you know, Jazz Sunday, we haven't talked a whole lot about jazz, have we? So here's the deal. So I'm listening to Miles Run the Voodoo Down, and I start doing nitrous listening to that to try and understand it and uncoil it. And finally, like, I caught it, because I caught Miles come back in. And what I didn't get about jazz that I understood about other music was that it starts here, and then it goes to here, and then it starts over again and goes here. So it's bump bum 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 bum. Well, with jazz, it's bum 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 bum. Dum bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. So jazz does the same thing. It has a repeater chorus or a verse in it. It just doesn't do it as blatantly and as obviously. Now, I like my film to not be obvious. I don't want it to be drawn out for me. I want to think about it. I want to figure it out. So why wouldn't I want my music to be the same way? Don't get me wrong. I love a good blockbuster. But pop music especially like hip hop and whatever you call that, whatever that stuff is they do now. It's the same thing it's always been. It was disco. It was hip hop. It was rap. It was rock and roll. You know, it was Bill Haley in the Comets. It was Elvis. It was pop music, popular music. Popular music is about a hook that somebody can get into and they can kind of go boom, 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 and it's catchy and it grabs you and you can't let go of it. It's Vanilla Ice with Ice, Ice, Baby. Ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 ding. It's got a hook in it. And that same hook is the same hook that Freddie Mercury brought up when he went, pressure, dun, 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 pressing down on me. Dun, 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 dun. I don't remember all the words now. You know, and it's the same hook as we will rock you. I mean, that might be the greatest hook of all time, right? And it's the same hook as most regular people would say, it's hard. Any streetwise son of a bitch knows. Don't fuck with this. Jazz has a hook. They just hide it. It's hidden in there, and you have to go find it. And that's the beauty of jazz. Now, what's that got to do with Thelonious Monk? Thelonious Monk will run down an arpeggio perfectly, and he'll do it 3 or 4 times, and he'll hide it inside 3 different ones. So he'll start to run one, then he'll cover it with another one, and then cover that with another one, and then run another one clear over the top of all of those, and then do that again and again and again, and then cover that, and again and again and again, and cover that, and then come all the way back to his main hook. That is the genius of Thelonious Monk. And it took me forever to figure that out. And once I did, I was like, oh my God. It's like the light kicked on. I understood Frank Zappa because all you have to do is listen to it and go, if this guy would just shut the fuck up and play, it would be incredible. And the only reason that Frank ever sang was because the record company said, if you don't put words to it, people won't buy it. If they put words to it, we'll give you a record contract. And so they gave him a record contract because he put words to it. That's why they're all so silly, because he's making fun of the entirety of it, because he's like, I just want to play music, and I want to create my own orchestrations and do my own things. He has hundreds and hundreds of hours of music that no one's ever heard, that they've never released. If you've ever seen any of the videos on, or the documentaries about how Frank Zappa, his videos of the claymation stuff, the guy who did the claymation, I forget. You can look it up for yourself if you're interested in it. But there's a documentary about the guy who does the claymation videos for Frank Zappa's early work. And in that video, they go down in his basement, and I believe Dweezil is the one, as a young Dweezil Zappa, or maybe it's Ahmed, I don't know, one of them shows this is Frank's work. And it's this massive, massive library, because he owned all of his own work. He never gave any of it. None of it was owned ever by the record company. That was the only deal he would make him. I own my own music always. You never own it. So he didn't make as much money, but he didn't give a shit because he kept his own music, which is way more valuable in the end. So that's my jazz kitchen for the day. It's the first time I've ever done this. I don't know if I'll even put it out there. I don't know if it means anything. And nobody will give a shit anyway, so who cares? I had a good time doing it, and I just really dig my background. That's my very favorite Thelonious Monk. Well, it's not my favorite. It's my second favorite cover. But this happens to be my favorite Thelonious Monk album because he goes back and visits some stuff, and he puts some new stuff on. And this was, he started recording this October 31st on Halloween of, I'll get the year wrong if I don't get it, if I don't look at it, 64, and he completed it in 65. I believe this was his first recording with Columbia. I could be wrong about that too, but he recorded this with Columbia, and this is when he actually was kind of discovered. I mean, he'd been discovered, and he'd been around for 20 years at this point, and nobody respected him. He couldn't sell it. He couldn't make a dime, and because he was so reticent to speak to anyone, it was said that on his last tour, in 70 or 71. If it was 71, it was the year I was born. Two of the guys who toured with him said that literally, not figuratively, that literally, he said 2 words the entire European tour. He didn't say good night, hello, goodbye, sleep well, how are you hungry, did you eat, I need a cigarette, play this way, that's too fast. Literally, he said nothing. They said he said 2 words. And I wish I knew what the 2 words were, but I can't remember what they were now. But anyways, Thelonious Monk is a guy who was an extreme introvert. He was a genius. In his early days, he started playing jazz when he started playing piano at 6. In his early days, they put him in the school. They put him in a school for the gifted. He was a poor kid from a poor neighborhood. He grew up where the men who fought in the Spanish-American War, the African-American men who fought there, they kind of built this area for them, I guess, and then they gentrified that area. Imagine that. Kicked the war vets out because they were poor and black, and moved in rich white people to take their place and gentrified the whole area. Way to go, taking care of your vets. Really nice. But anyway, he didn't complete the school because he just always had sort of a strangeness about him. I think today they would probably put him on the autism spectrum almost assuredly, just by what I've seen of looking at old video of him and things. But I don't know that. I think that's the case. And the way he played, the way he loved music, the way he listened to it. Like, for example, he didn't curve his fingers when he played. He played flat. Everything he played was flat. And sometimes he would hit one note with 2 fingers at the same time. Just strange things. He hit the notes hard. He'd hit the keys like this. And people said, this guy can't play. He's terrible. And then as they would listen to it, they started to understand, oh, this is genius. But it took a very long time for people to understand that. He used to write music in the clubs, and he would write it so that no one could steal it from him, because back then everyone was trying to latch on to everyone else's new stuff, and he was the new guy, and everybody kept trying to say, oh man, this guy's really great. So the people that were in the know, they kept trying to steal his stuff. And so he kept making his music harder and harder, which is what ultimately made him so great, was that he was writing about things that nobody else could do. So that is my Jazz Kitchen Sunday podcast. Thanks for stopping by. We will see you again. I'm going to get Aaron, and maybe he publishes it, maybe he doesn't. It's up to him. Much love to you all. Namaste.